not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall continue to follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the most super intelligent power, source, and force of love and creation forever. Uh-oh. Oh, for fuck's sake. Hang on, we done fucked something up. Oh, God. So dumb. So dumb. Well, I found a eccentricity with the logging device. What the hell? Did not even know this was possible. What's just happened? Well, that's no way to start. No point in even describing the silliness of what's occurred. Government foolishness. That's all I can say. And software, idiosyncratic software. It's pretty much sums that up. Driving into what looks like a rainstorm. I see some lightning and thunder. Well, I see some lightning, rather. Just fueled up the rig. Got our egg yolk drink right here. The Royal Wheat. Go ahead and get into that. I've got some thoughts on the Beast. Experienced the Beast firsthand yesterday at the Joplin 44 truck stop, which is a Petro, TA Petro, one of the major brands. For national truck stop chains. I just left the Loves. That's where this company fuels at. Everybody loves Loves. Not I. I'm not a big fan of Loves. It has its good points, but number one, it's way too popular in my view. So surprise, surprise, my favorite is perhaps the least popular of the three, at least amongst this low form of trucking called drive 53-foot drive-in. I like the TA Petros. They usually have the best washing machines. Now this one had the front loaders, which I'm not a huge fan of, but they had the proper industrial machines, so they actually work quite well. Some of those, I don't know, man. My voice has been cracking. The entire time I've been back as a truck driver. The old voice has been cracking. Anyway, whatever that's all about. Oh yeah, toll road ahead. That's right. Yeah, the technology's certainly increased, but overall, I'm still a fan of the old school top loading washer with the regular old agitator. They rinse the best, in my opinion. Either way, even those you need a proper filter, or one will end up with dirty, soapy water from prior washes. Now entering Oklahoma. Talk about feeding the beast. Here's a downstream casino. They have a poker room, and apparently, although I have no idea if they have games regularly, but apparently they spread. That's what it's called. They spread pot limit Omaha high, which is what I like to play for poker. I thought about it. They have truck parking. I thought about it yesterday. Just don't really get. I don't know. It's lost its appeal. As a way to potentially earn some money. Although in the short run, it's definitely luck. In the longer run, the skill factor comes in. But either way, hang on, let's take this taurine before I forget. Or did I? Yeah, there it is. Hopefully the connection holds up. I think we're technically on a reservation, although much of Oklahoma is a reservation. So, let's see the res. Yeah, so this is one of those truck stops where it's real big and gigantic and fancy for a truck stop, and has plenty of parking and a lot of amenities, lots of bathrooms, really nice laundry room by truck stop standards. And meanwhile, yeah, it was the middle of the day, but other than fuel and showers, which comes on the fuel card if the driver showers there. There really wasn't anybody in there shopping or buying anything. Uh, I was looking at some hoodies. I probably would have bought a hoodie, except I couldn't find anything that, is what I was looking for. Tried. Getting quite a lightning show now. I would have left probably an hour and a half ago, except on the government clock, it's silly if you think about these regulations. I was ready to go about an hour and a half ago. In fact, probably should have waited a little longer. But with the rain, I could get rained on the whole way there. So, number one, that increases the risk of increases the chances of people crashing. Could slow me down. Probably won't. Still dealing with this fatigue. But yeah, I didn't even like the feeling of being in there. It felt very beastly to me. Very beast system. And then, whatever this breakdown of societal dynamics has been, where, people, maybe before the pandemic, people were merely tolerating one another. I don't know. and then coming out of my own, obliviousness in certain ways with respect to certain social dynamics, and then of course raised in a mind control cult, and formally taught and indoctrinated from an early age, to be open to engaging with the public in order to attempt to proselytize to them, and have them get involved with the Jehovah's Witnesses, of which I was never a member and never joined. Let's be clear. It wasn't my idea. So number one, getting the notion that, and it's not everybody, right? It's not everybody, but, and maybe it's the less NPC normies amongst us. Maybe it's the people who are a little more tapped in to so-called reality. But, certain individuals, I find myself kind of giving them the stink eye in a way, and then they seem to be doing that to me. But then here's a couple of NPC normies just hanging out in the environment, and being able to read the body language and the way they position themselves, just waiting around to have a conversation, which is fair. I'm sure I've had my own versions of that in the past, but more and more aware of this. It's just, at this point, why would I even get involved in such a thing? It's now raining, if anybody cares. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and slow down. Why not? And then one of them in particular was an old man, I assumed to be a trucker. And by old man, I mean 70 plus. And he had the osteoporosis going on. Poor little feller. But I guess that's probably what he's been used to historically is, go to the truck stop, handle your business and shoot the shit. And there also wasn't anybody in there shooting the shit. And then, wandered by the diner. Although maybe that was yesterday. I don't even remember. But, the restaurant, it seems like there's always just like one person at the counter nowadays. Like one person sitting there eating. Whereas I remember in the past, you'd be more likely to have a bunch of people in there, talking about a bunch of bozo, right-wing type activities. Stereotypical right-wing things. Maybe claiming to have been special forces, in their military career or whatever. And just didn't. I waited until I got to Love's and just went into the bathroom and washed my face. But I don't know, man. There's just something about that environment that I think in the past, people such as myself, when I first went into trucking in 2018, I probably would have thought that was pretty cool. And I probably would have went in there, and there would have been at any time of the day or night, there would have been enough activity going on. It's seemingly, the ability to sort of fade into the background is gone. And then also the strangeness of as soon as I pull up to the hoodies or whatever, seemingly out of nowhere, here's some bozo pulls up and starts looking at products nearby, and it's like, oh, okay, here's the human, the NPC normie that doesn't know what to do, so just waits for somebody else to do something and then does whatever that is. Where I'm kind of the opposite. I'm less likely if somebody's over there looking at the hoodies. I might be like, okay, I'll come back later. Strange all the way around. But yeah, just the, nothing is happening in there. Is this some sort of sign of, where society is increasingly, people moving to online shopping. More and more I'm seeing truckers, myself included at times, having things dropped off, you know, Walmart delivery or whatever the case may be. Pardon me. And then the child on the thumbnail, right? And that's really what we're talking about is it's a nation and probably an entire world or realm, but it's certainly a nation of however many purportedly millions, hundreds of millions, fed to the beast from day one. Sacrificed to Moloch's machine of industrial and post-industrial society. Moloch is aptly described in Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl. And again, no reason to character assassinate Allen Ginsberg. He's famous enough that that level of fame, I would say, is all of the character assassinating that's necessary, which includes anybody that, the individual may align with, whether it's a Charlie Kirk or a Joe Rogan or whoever, Once a certain level is reached, a Theo Vaughn, as we now see a clips of Theo Vaughn seemingly playing this role of representing certain so-called tinfoil hat conspiratorial ideas around, groups of people that, certain groups of people, certain nations, Israel, and, Theo having his own freak out and being featured in apparently government propaganda around deportations. Then Theo himself having, I think 4.5 million subscribers on YouTube. So he's on that level that we're talking about. How much does he make a year? What's his salary? What's his income? How many hundreds of thousands does he make just from YouTube, if not more? And then we see him, clips of him on with Joe Rogan. And this idea that Rogan is now buddies with Elon Musk and has had Peter Thiel, meanwhile, I believe Peter Thiel and Musk founded PayPal together. And then whatever this Palantir is. And so Rogan, seemingly representing the establishment to some extent. And then, since I was a listener of the JRE podcast from day one, and it was mostly, most of the listeners were on an RSS feed, a proper podcast RSS feed, but it was also the video component on Ustream in the early days. And people have forgotten that Rogan launched that podcast and almost entirely discussing conspiracy theories, MMA, and comedy. That's really all he talked about. And very heavy on the conspiracy theories. And over time, he sort of, would pare back how involved he would get in the conspiracies. Of course, originally, while he was building the audience, he was willing to entertain all sorts of conspiracy theories. A lot of Bigfoot talk, as I recall. Operation Mockingbird or whatever the fuck. I've lost track of what some of these things are. See, this is what I mean about, as I'm now in heavy rain, as I suspected would be the case. I could have left an hour and a half ago and probably gotten out ahead of all of this. Except, oh no, the government says you need to wait about an hour and a half. And I don't even mean I was legal to drive an hour and a half ago. What I'm talking about is in order to make this delivery and then pick up the next load is what I'm talking about within the hours of service. Without getting fussed at by the company for starting my clock too early. So I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't even matter. Let's not get into that. So I've gone from thinking I might have left too early to now I'm thinking, well, shit, I might be cutting it close. This says I'll arrive at 7:53. They want me there at 8:30. The appointment's at 9, and I've had some packages sent to an Amazon locker, so I'll be pulling into a Love's truck stop near Oklahoma City. And who knows how long that will take to get in and out of there. I'm guesstimating 15 minutes total, but who knows? Hard to say. That'll be peak time. We'll see. And so is Theo Vaughn being positioned as some sort of tool of the system? Well, he already has been. So is the system, the beast system, moving one of its chess pieces? Well, most certainly. And then now the baby truther, right? You're just your regular old normie NPC bozo in the comments of the clip channels. Shout out to Unique Entertainment, I believe is what it's called. If anybody's looking for a good clip. Oh, no, actually, this was Too Lazy to Try, which I'm not a huge fan of these days, but I watch a lot of Unique Entertainment, who may or may not put out his own clip on this topic. I can't be bothered to watch most of these podcasts anymore, certainly. Yeah, those of us, and it's not a club to me. It's not. Oh, it's back of the bus, too cool for school. Well, I've been into conspiracies, whenever. Who cares? It's not that. It's the recognition that your average NPC normie bozo is now, especially the right wingers, the so-called right wing is, more or less conspiracy theorists at this point. Baby truthers, Truther 101. So I see him down there in the comments. So I point out the next layer of, well, Rogan started his podcast talking about all these conspiracies. So I said it's probably Rogan practicing his ability to sort of counter these narratives in real time on his podcast, while Theo is either oblivious or is MK Ultra mind controlled. And certainly here's where the Southern aspect comes in. Theo's clearly intelligent, but then it's not implausible that he would be on there talking about Israel and by extension the Jews, and then talking about the idea of a surveillance state and Peter Thiel and all of these things, right? Palantir and Peter Thiel, while plausibly playing himself off as not realizing that Joe Rogan has Peter Thiel on his show, and that, because I don't think Theo mentioned Palantir. I don't think he mentioned the Thiel by name. I think he mentioned Palantir, right? And I guess it's the idea of, Theo is now woe manning, oh man, look out. It's a surveillance state. They're bringing in the surveillance state, black helicopters. And of course, the predictive programming, as we know, when the listener or the viewer sees Theo reacting this way, well, the predictive programming is already there to view him as some version of Gene Hackman from Enemy of the State. Excuse me just a moment. Deliverance, baby. That's deliverance in real time right there. Healing and deliverance. I won't get to preaching just yet, but I want to talk about this beast that we was all fed into as children. That's why there's a child on the thumbnail. That's a child from the 80s, I'm pretty sure. It's an 80s baby, right? Probably a millennial. Grew up in the 90s. Of course, I'm an 80s kid and grew up in the 80s and the early 90s. I'd say like 85 to like 83 to about 96. So that was my sweet spot for youth. How old was I? I was in college by 96. Yeah, 83 to 93 would be, yeah, I graduated high school in 93. But yeah, 96 is good. Either way, fed to the beast. A kid's already been fed to the beast of that we call life, which is a breakfast cereal. And that ain't Mikey, but hell, he ain't that far off. How old's that kid on that thumbnail? I don't know. I can't call it. But yeah, Mikey likes it. Well, does Mikey have a choice? If Mikey's fed to the beast and Benton was fed to the beast and you, the listener, were fed to the beast, it's just this seemingly never-ending series of children that, symbolically represent spiritual perfection and innocence, in my estimation, and that if all, beings, again, setting aside for the moment the possibility of the validity of the philosophy of solipsism, and is it not suspicious that supposedly there's consensus among the all so-called philosophers of nihilism and solipsism can't ever possibly have any validity? And I would say, well, what do you mean? Isn't context always a factor? But I don't want to get off into that just now. Surely there would have to be a context where it would at least need to be considered. Oh no, just invalid across the board. Well, that seems suspicious to me. Correct philosophy being the absence of incorrect philosophy. Well, if I'm unwilling to even consider two philosophies in any context, how am I going to understand if they are invalid? If I've been instructed not to consider them, how do I know they're invalid? I'm supposed to just take the system's word for it. Oh, well, no, we can't take you seriously, Ben. That you're describing solipsism. Oh, really? Okay. You're describing nihilism. Oh, okay. Well, then how can there be meaning in a beast system that people never fail to feed the beast? And here I am engaged in commerce, driving an 18-wheeler. So it's not as if I'm not doing the thing I'm calling out. I'm doing it now, in fact. And I just went to a Love's truck stop and spent $10 on 2 cans of cold brew. They say, well, that's egregious. Why would you do that? Well, I live in a truck. I've limited opportunities to spend these Federal Reserve notes while they still seemingly have a value, air quotes value. Anyway, let's not get off into that. That's a whole other diatribe. And yes, I understand it's disturbing to consider the idea of humans feeding children into a beast system. That's what's happening. That's what is happening and continues to happen. So how can there ever be a proper society or a proper world or a proper realm when I continue to feed the beast? I'm at least feeding the beast, even if only indirectly, in a maybe limited form. Okay, well, I never replicated or created any children to feed into the beast. I guess that would be directly feeding the beast. But then, collectively, certainly the people, air quotes, never fail to feed the beast. That's what daily life is all about, is feed the beast. So, at what point is it just, I don't even want to go into the big fancy truck stop? If I'm going to enter into a truck stop at this point, that seems incongruous to me based on what I know myself to be at the level of true knowledge of self/self-realization. What seems slightly less incongruous is the grimy, tiny, way too small parking lot Loves. Let me go in there. Right. And yeah, when it's busy time, there'll be a hustle and a bustle. But then in this area, there's plenty of Loves, and that's one of the less desirable ones, right? And that's probably why I like some of the TA and the Petros, is they're grimy and run down and undesirable, but generally, they have larger parking lots, and it's a fairly easy in and out, and less of the rookies go there. It's pretty much all the companies. It's either TA, it's either Flying J Pilot or it's Loves for the fuel cards. And then, is it even desirable to run into an actual human being when I talk about, you know, seemingly giving each other the stink eye at times? Perhaps. I don't know. Less and less Benton, speaking only for Benton, wants less and less to do with humanity, but then the idea of a human being, and well, Benton, are you not a human being? No. Benton is performing in the context of a human being, absolutely. What I am is not human, most assuredly, because what I am can never die or experience death or defeat or destruction or anxiety or fear or any negative states of being. That's true knowledge of self, but not a fake it till you make it, to know with certainty. So yeah, that's an overlay from my perspective. Yeah, I get it. I can grasp this, but it's less and less desirable to do these things, certainly. These performances, especially having already achieved and claimed victory. Well, again, what I am is victory. What I am is substance, value, authority, life, creation, expansion. The beast system, lest we forget, is manifesting through the subversion of the creative force of what I am, based on its understanding of these concepts, but based on the lack of love, the lack of authority, the lack of substance, the lack of value. So surprise, surprise, the dead money in this dead realm is not based on value. It's in fact based on the US dollar. Represents a unit of debt. The money's dead. The job is dead, right? The commerce is dead. So, perhaps the repulsion or the revulsion I felt and experienced in that big fancy deserted truck stop was maybe grasping or experiencing it closer to the level of the nature of what it is, which is dead. When there's a whole bunch of seemingly alive humans in there, the hustle and the bustle, and there's a line of people to buy overpriced products because they live on the road and they're working as truck drivers. There's a lot of desirable products in there that aren't always easily accessible to truckers. That's going on. It's maybe a little easier to go along with the notion of, oh, this is living and desirable on some level. And there is an attraction to that. Especially lesser evolved. Like if I remember the lesser evolved versions of Benton, I on some level at times would have been attracted to a business or an environment that was busy, as long as it wasn't. It reminds me of working at a gas station in college. And we had parking spaces right outside the front door. And one day, right before, there was always a dead period right before the rush would happen. It was usually right at about 5 o'clock. It's a busy store no matter what. But somebody managed to pull up there when there was nobody in the store. There was not a single car on the lot. And this guy pulled up and parked kind of perpendicular to the front door. He parked kind of sideways across the spaces. And I went out there and said, hey, man, you can't park that way. And he's like, why not? There's nobody here. I said, hey, I understand that, but I promise you all of those pumps and every parking spot on this lot will be full by the time you leave. I guarantee it. And I was proven right. They were on their way. They just hadn't gotten there yet. And well, that environment is actually more enticing to most people than the deserted environment. That's how it works. And society that seems to have been be reversing to some extent, but as we know, the normies, they all pretty much, the NPC normies all pretty much go the same place at the same time. So a lot of these smaller areas still have a rush hour, and as I hilariously, to try to avoid a wreck on the interstate, I drove through, the main road, the main highway that paralleled the interstate in Virginia through like 3 different small towns, except I happened to perfectly hit it right at their rush hour. And so it was bumper to bumper traffic. But, that's other than that 30-minute period, they don't have traffic. But everybody, and they probably have it in the morning, everybody's going to the same places at the same time of day. The herd. And of course, that makes everything feel normal. So to go into this gigantic truck stop that can't possibly be making a profit at this point, it doesn't even seem possible. How could it? When it's a ghost town. And America is supposedly based on capitalism and fiat currency and people spending money. Well, yeah, they're spending money. They're not spending it in the brick and mortars. And I already hear I hear the brains. I can sense people's brains going, well, not where I live. Yeah, absolutely. I just described a scenario where NPC normies are all going to the same places at the same time of day. What I'm saying is that in the buildup of all of that corporate hellscape all across America, there were peak times, but then there was steady business throughout the day. What I'm saying is the steady business throughout the day is over with. There's still peak times. I just acknowledged it. It's peak time or it's a ghost town. I used to be able to go into Walmart at 3 a.m. and there was people in there. I might have to wait in line if a couple of cashiers didn't show up and it was, free self-checkout. I might have to wait in line at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. I'm saying it's a ghost town at 9 a.m. now. What are we even talking about? And then the delusion and the denial, where a part of almost everybody's brain goes, oh, it's a panic response. Oh, it's not like that where I live. Well, that's Chicken Little, right? Which is really not Chicken Little. It's a response to feeling like Chicken Little, the sky's falling, the sky's falling. So yes, it is Chicken Little. But meanwhile, what does Theo Vaughn say? So Theo Vaughn on Joe Rogan represents part of the psyche of the general public, which is, a surveillance state is being ushered in. And when I talk about that the system is maintained at the state of collapse, and that's in secret to some extent, it's been a surveillance state probably forever. It's probably never not been a surveillance state. I'm talking about an actual functional technological surveillance state. I was reading articles pre-pandemic about how half of all Americans were already in a facial recognition database. It's been a technological surveillance grid for a long ass time, right? And in the process of being fed to the beast system, we know the children, the babies, the hospitals have been collecting their blood and DNA after birth and submitting that to the governments. It's probably the mid-1960s. I don't know. I've looked into some of these conspiracies. So, and again, conspiracy is not even the right term, but what is referred to as a conspiracy or a rabbit hole, I've looked into some of this so long ago, I'd have to brush up on it. I've forgotten more about this stuff than a lot of people would even know. And again, it's not we're too cool for school. That's some kind of club to join. It is what it is. There's always people who are, arrive at the party earlier than others, you know, which is mostly just annoying. When I was running around trying to tell people about all of the surveillance in 2008 or whatever, and I don't mean financial crisis, I just mean back during, or say 2010 or whatever, and people looked at me like I was a space alien because I was trying to. I might mention in passing, well, yeah, of course the circuitries, of course by law your phone has to be activatable by a remote control by the government, even when it's switched off, as long as the battery's in it. Of course. You just looked at like I'm an insane person. Well, all those people that looked at me like I was an insane person are now the baby truthers of, well, yeah, of course the government's spying on everyone and everything all of the time. Of course it is. But then, so part of the mind control and what I would argue is satanic ritual abuse, right? The mind control built into the system and the abuse built into the system is, and as we know, shout out to Julian Huxley, right? Programming that's, transmitted or communicated in a state of stress or fear, it goes much deeper. It's much more effective, right? But this is all basic stuff, folks. Like, this is all very basic stuff that I'm talking about here. But it's interesting to watch the propaganda operate because let's not forget, there's children and young people of all ages. And so it's not to be fed into the beast one time as a ritual sacrifice symbolically. That's part of it. But it's actually a perpetual being fed to the beast through ignorance and compulsion and coercion, and you must be educated, you must be taught, you must be turned into an addressable corporate unit through indoctrination and education and all of these things, and so-called air quotes earn a living. Well, if what I am is representative of the highest forms of life, that says a lot about what this place is, that Benton is expected to earn a living. Like, what are you talking about? That's Benton's birthright, except what Benton is can't even properly be said to have had a birth ever. Only within the context of time, space, location, place, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, the heaven or hell realm existing, at the level of delusion and illusion. So that's a lot of qualifiers and caveats, right? Just to get us somewhere near the heart of the matter for the purposes of the discussion. And then, the intelligence and vigilance and concentration and focus required for the individual to even follow through the discourse, right? To follow along. And meanwhile, to speak extemporaneously off the dome for, however long this is going to go on, I need the listeners' brains to fill in parts of this because invariably I won't recognize at times that I thought something and failed to say the words out of my mouth, and I'll move on to the next thing too quickly. Or I will spend too much time trying to set up the next point and forget where the fuck I was going. See, the limitations of the speaker and the limitations of the individual's capacity to even take in these messages, and then, at what point in the future, will the being, maybe a seed was planted today that won't really begin to grow or germinate. Maybe the seed germinates for a period of time, but isn't really detectably grown tall enough. It may be years, right? And that's okay. That's not really my business. As far as Benton, the performer, in the context, so that's not his business. So it's actually by the time, this is what I mean when I talk about a 50-year-old or a boomer being ran through by the system and having some version of Stockholm syndrome. By the time the being makes it to my age, we've already individually fed ourselves to the beast and sacrificed ourselves to the beast so many times. We don't know which way is up and which way is down in some way. And that's where you get to, oh, Gen Z doesn't want to work. No, Gen Z hasn't been ran through by the system enough. Guess who also didn't want to work when he was 20? Me. What 20-year-old wanted to work? What mechanisms compelled us to work a job? Well, one is most people, my peers, many of them getting married and popping out a kid right about age 20. So the 20-year-olds who didn't have children, such as Benton, well, what other mechanisms were there to compel or coerce or incentivize me to choose to go into employment? Well, a lot of it is feeling pressured to create an identity. And what is that? To create an identity in relation to this place, the beast. That's a violation. That is to feed oneself to the beast. Right. And I see it in the comments of a channel that I watch called Tragic Reality, where this guy, as a young fella, I think he's about 25, so young in meaning in his 20s, not as a pejorative. So not ran through by the system yet. Maybe he won't be. Who knows? And I wouldn't wish a job on my worst enemy. Oh, but Gen Z doesn't want to work. Good. Does the being want to see more corporate slavery or less? Which represents a good thing and which represents a bad thing? So to say Gen Z doesn't want to work on some level is to say corporate slavery good. Refusal or inability or just unable to corporately to perform as a corporate slave bad. Are you, and I don't mean you the listener, are they crazy? Are they? Yeah, they are crazy. That is the Stockholm syndrome. They're too closely identified with a de facto insane system. That's the reality. Don't kill the messenger. If I had never arrived here, it would still be this way. Now, while certainly owning up to my own participation. So I've even seen people in the comments recognizing the truth of what this content creator is putting forth, but then saying, oh, well, and here's where the person is condescending, the commenter becomes condescending and assumes the exalted position and says, well, you've seemingly experienced ego death, but then, you're still in the early stages of a certain type of development, seemingly, and then saying, well, at some point in the future, you'll be able to choose to craft your own identity. And then that will resolve some of the issues that the content creator is not even having, that he's being gaslit and mocked and ridiculed, but sort of implying it, not directly mocked and ridiculed. Just to say, okay, well, here's your pat on the head. You're doing okay for now, but in the future, you're really going to be doing something, right? Very condescending. And so I just replied and asked a bunch of questions like, well, specifically, like what would be how is it, under what circumstances is it desirable to form an identity, and in what context, and then who or what benefits as a result. And so, because remember, this goes back to something I've been talking about recently, where many people are willing to discuss many aspects of these same topics, but only outside of outside of specific context. My apologies. That was some autistic, getting a little too excited autistically. Undiagnosed fake autistically, neurodivergently getting a little too excited. My apologies. Let's control ourselves. One moment. The energies rose a little too high, a little too rapidly. Because old Benton's got it like that. Certainly would never want to entirely lose his edge. And so I need specificities, because broadly speaking, he's not wrong when he's talking about identity and all of these things. But identity is what? It's always in relation to something else, because we're talking about human psychology. Now, if we're going to talk about what I am, which is an indivisible spirit, well, that's the context of identity, in fact, exists within that larger force. So the inversion is to invert it and say, well, actually, identity, right, exists outside of that is indivisible force. No, that's not possible. So I must see the discourser, in this case represented by the YouTube commenter, must provide and apply context. Otherwise, I'm going to assume they're lying by omission. Why are they not being specific? When apparently they're putting themselves in an exalted position above it all, certainly they have the intelligence to understand and apply context. So now we're into stupid or liar, and I've just eliminated the possibility of stupidity. Why are they lying to us? Why are they lying to us? What's their agenda? And what master are they serving, knowingly or unknowingly? Now, is there a seeming benefit to Benton to operate with identity? Well, it seems to me like that's necessary to maintain one's sanity, and also, access to identity that's been crafted over time and experience within the context of time, space, location, place, within a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. See, do you see how I will go ahead and put the context in there? Yeah, we need the context for the discussion. And so what the being will see, and what intelligent people who read that thread is, outside of this, whatever this fellow is gaslighting and mocking and ridiculing, and thus, attempting to have people feel fear, guilt, and shame, it only seemingly works outside of a context. We need a muddying of the waters. If the being within their own intelligence begins to consider what is being asserted within specific contexts, it falls apart. It don't pertain. See, that's intelligence. Now, that there's other forms of intelligence. So what I would say is, if the individual within the context of human experience, as desirable or undesirable as that experience may be, damn sure better have developed or be in the process of developing that form of intelligence. Maybe that form of intelligence comes more or less naturally to Benton. Well, it can't come naturally to everybody, and that's why there's no such thing as common sense. It's fairly obvious to me when somebody's like, when I see someone removing context, and yeah, I probably do it at times. So what? Is it not other people's? You just say, yeah, but specifically in what, can we apply a context to this? And he said, well, it's really their job, I would say, to apply the context in a way. But then in the John Nash game theory, optimal mathematics of, the metaphorical poker game of incomplete information, like, well, what is each person's agenda? Is that person trying to be persuasive? Is Benton trying to be persuasive? This all plays a part. And then how to do that at the optimal level will always be based on whatever strategies the other participants are observably engaging in. And then whatever can be sort of gleaned by deductive reasoning. That is a form of genius. Yeah, I can't, go to a classroom and do any of the mathematics involved with John Nash's, game theory optimal, but I promise you, it's going on within the core of what I am. Benton has access to it on some level, provably. Okay, so is that not representative of genius somewhere? I mean, I'm not saying I'm a genius. I'm saying that whatever Benton is certainly seemingly has access to genius, right? Now, does Benton need to be able to go to the classroom and demonstrate some ability for mathematics? Meanwhile, people have suggested to me, oh, well, you could go back to school because I did attend university in the 90s. Yeah, and you know what I would study? Mathematics. This world does not exist at the level of needing me. No, there's no benefit to me going to a university and studying mathematics. It's not going to help anybody. Yeah, but my neuroplasticity and my brain would probably like it. I would find it interesting and stimulating and a challenge, but imagine the frustrations of the professor trying to, because I've never been that, I was proficient, barely competent, more or less. Meaning, like when I took the ACT, and I'm from one of those areas, we didn't take the SATs, but I made the exact score I needed on the math portion to not be considered remedial in math when I entered university. Right. And that's probably only because I'm really good at taking tests, and it was a multiple choice test. So I had enough grasp of mathematics to just sort of be able to equationally kind of, get it down to a 50-50 and then just flip a coin. Right. That ain't too hard to do. I had trouble with college algebra, but again, I had zero interest in it. As an older person, I find mathematics to be way more interesting because, the old cliche of, well, how is this, when am I going to use this in the real world? It's like, well, how about go live in the real world and maybe begin to see that there's math. Everything has a mathematical. There's nothing that doesn't have a mathematical. Everything's based on business transactions. Well, all of that can be brought back to mathematics 100% of the time. And people may not know because there's a movie called A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe. All of consumer society and transacting with business, it's all based on his math. All of it is based on his math. Period. Period, end of story. So whatever, and then remember John Nash was a schizophrenic. So what level of demons infested him, to teach him that mathematics or to use him as a vessel to introduce that, right place, right time into the realm, right? Here's your John Nash game theory optimal realm. Right on time to roll out some of this technology. Oh, but then it's, the flash crash, the fat finger where some trader supposedly typoed and made some billion-dollar trade that just flash crashed the market. Sure, okay. Sure. But again, that's all going to be based on those mathematics. And those technologies, to facilitate those technologies. And then back to Theo Vaughn, and so to suggest, air quotes, they, the reptile people or whoever are bringing in a surveillance state. Well, that very powerfully sends a signal to the viewer and listener that, well, yeah, it's not here yet. And then the chicken littling of the sky is about to fall and maybe it won't fall. Meanwhile, it's been a surveillance state, and NPC normies and baby truthers and Truther 101. Again, the Orwellian 1984 concept of, simultaneously the cognitive dissonance of simultaneously of holding two seemingly opposing ideas simultaneously. To already accept and understand that it is a surveillance state, and then, well, but they are bringing in a surveillance state. Well, which is it? Well, it is both, actually, because the system is maintained at a state of collapse, within a state of collapse. So whatever Theo Vaughn is on about is an acknowledgement of that, whether he knows it or not. These are all very subtle dynamics, or they can be. Some of this is all quite subtle. So how sensitive must the individual be to detect such subtleties? Right. Quite sensitive indeed. And is that even desirable? So now we're back to the YouTube commenters' idea of creating an identity for oneself. Okay, in relation to what, for what purposes, to benefit what or whom? Until those questions are answered, the individual having already been sacrificed to the beast system, and then seemingly, so it's an acknowledgement that, oh, the being may have experienced his ego death. Well, what does the system find expedient? Okay, well, who cares about an ego death if the being, air quotes, wakes up? Well, if they just sacrifice themselves to Moloch's machine yet again, who cares what identity they do it through? And do you see the strategy? And this is the spiritual war and the psychological war. And for whatever reason, Benton came out of the box as just a natural high-level tactician. I don't know why. My brain effortlessly does all of these tactics and strategies. No idea. Always been this way. Always been able to outmaneuver, and I don't know why. So as soon as that person makes that response in the comments, I immediately just, and it's not a visual thing, in my own brain, I perceive this battlefield in a way of possibilities and strategies. And again, that is the John Nash mathematics perceptibly going on in my mental space. Whether or not it's my mental space or not, I have access to it because it exists within what I am. That's the context. So again, I recognize at some point in my own so-called journey that I have access to all spiritual powers. And in fact, the being limits itself within the context of the performance. So it's not a going out here and bootstrapping and through a yang energy of assertion, aggression, dominance, learning how to access these powers by creating them. It's to learn how to get out of one's own way enough to unlock to the spiritual power. And all of us seemingly have access to certain abilities out of the gate. Some more so than others. That's just what this is. And that seemingly happens serendipitously, which is also seems to be arbitrary, which humans have trouble resolving, which is why me and not them. And I know Tragic Reality, the content creators, asked the question like, well, why me and why the people who come to his live streams? Well, half of them are haters, and they're attracted to that, maybe on behalf of something else, right? Some other entity or demonic oppression, right? Perhaps. Who knows? But then the half who are actually there, on the so-called up and up, whatever that would mean. Well, yes, serendipity, which is a unexpected, unforeseen, but generally considered fortunate event, because in some contexts it's not fortunate, and some would view themselves as persecuted by having certain spiritual understandings at a just an inborn inherent level, right? To be seemingly tortured as a result, perhaps. just a moment. We've got to socially engineer a bozo into passing us. Something I suspected was going to happen. When I passed this big rig, they were following the big rig. And I thought to myself, well, probably since I'm going faster, they're going to then pass that big rig so they can tailgate me and hide behind me. And then I was distracted by the discourse. And then, yep, that's them. Of course it is. Because they want to hide behind this truck so they can look at their screen. Be safe, of course. Safety third. Safety last. There can never be safety here. It's not possible. Just like there can't be external meaning, because this realm lacks the ability to provide meaning. It only understands lack of meaning. Therefore, there cannot be external meaning. So in order for, within the context of time, space, location, place in this delusory realm, in order for Benton to be what he knows himself to be, this realm cannot provide meaning. It's not possible. Because in order for Benton to be what he knows himself to be, this realm has to be the inverse of that, which is lack of meaning. Therefore, this realm can never provide meaning because it doesn't know what meaning is. It only understands meaning based on antithesis. Knows that it's antithesis. It knows that it manifests based on a lack of meaning, so then it can, in a ghoulish, garish, zombie-like fashion, can sort of backwards extrapolate what meaning is from its own perspective. Again, more subtleties and more strategizing. And now these people can't maintain their speed, but they could go 71 on my tail. Now we're going 57. See, this is your motoring public, folks. This is your motoring public, and probably I'm just going to pull onto the shoulder, get off the logs, and wait for them to go on down the road. And that's, I'm supposed to accept that that's a conscious being in the way that I'm a conscious being. No. So that's a human, though. That's a human. We all agree that's a human. So what I am can never be human. The human layer is part of the experience of the delusion. And I view it as less and less desirable to, air quotes, be human. And now they found a buddy. They're going to ride along with a car that's going fast. So now I get to speed up. Maybe. And then, of course, the normie NPC horde rushes in to say, what's the big deal? Exactly, what's the big deal? Why? If it's not a big deal, why don't they just drive for themselves? Why are they trying to get me to drive? I'm already driving 2 vehicles. Why are they trying to get me to drive 3? Exactly, what's the big deal? Indeed, I agree. What is the big deal? That's the argument, I would say, for them to stop doing what they're doing. It's not the argument, oh, but that's right, Benton has already exhibited an ability to do better, so the answer always has to be for Benton to do better. That's gaslighting. That's spiritual attack. So that is spiritual attack. Because everybody knows that person can't do better, so nobody's ever going to ask them to do better. They're left alone. They're the criminal. They're the spiritual criminal. And Dick Gregory, rest in peace, rest in power, may peace be upon him. When somebody tried to get him to do better, he said, if you talk to the criminal, why are you bothering me? Why are you? There's an assassin on the loose and he's going to try to kill me. If you know. Man, I was really chopping it up. I was really laying it down. Man, I was really chopping it up. I was really laying it down. That's a shame. Y'all missed some good stuff right there. Boy, howdy, y'all really missed some good game right there. That's a shame. That's certainly a shame. They're stacking up on old Benton back there, trying to ride him to the promised land. Yes, they are. Now we got big rigs trying to ride him to the promised land. Owner-operators probably trying to save on fuel, get in the draft, trying to stay in business. Flatbed. So he probably used to pull dry van or reefer, and then he couldn't make a living doing that. And then the internet told him, "Oh well, the money's in dry van or money's in flatbed." Yeah, of course it is, right up until it's not. So he's out here trying to get in my draft and not go out of business. Sir, it's dead anyway, sir. How about the answer ultimately is to stop attempting to breathe life into death? Quit trying to resuscitate a dead business in a realm of death and games of lies, which is, how about individuals stop feeding themselves to the beast? How about they stop feeding their children to the beast? Well, we all know that's not going to happen. Hell, Benton, you're doing it right now. Exactly. Now, maybe Benton is looking forward to the day when he won't be doing that. We ain't there yet. Not yet, maybe. Time will tell. Where's my coffee? Man, I hope y'all caught some of that. I was really got into it right at some point. Looked down and we was disconnected. And then, of course, in managing my own energies and fatigue, I'm seeing more and more that, sleep is really not an issue. The proper trucker certainly has leveled up their ability to sleep and to get proper sleep to do, because we have to do the job. But then also seeing more and more just the necessity of rest, even when not sleeping. And, the fatigue of not necessarily these discourses, I would say, the fatigue of, coping with the realities of so-called life. And not because of depression, anxiety, fear, or any of that, because Benton experiences little to no of that anymore, almost none. But the creative expression, always performing and asserting and doing a thing in order to avoid defaulting to serving this wicked system of things. Right? That can be quite the energetic outlay, especially while taking orders from Eurotrash and Eastern Europeans and bandied about within a system of always attempting to, do things plausibly within the regulations, but then, especially with the government seemingly cleaning up trucking to some extent, a lot of these loads I'm now being assigned, not that long ago, were being done by outlaw trucking companies, which were not abiding by the hours of service. And dispatchers trying to contact me to get, and here's what level of spiritual violation is it to be expected to say, are you still on time to deliver at 9 a.m. when it was never possible for me to deliver at 9 a.m. within the fucking regulations. It was never possible. And then being laughed at because I responded to a text by saying, God willing and the creek don't rise, just to avoid the violation of, what am I going to say? Absolute no. And we both know that this ain't even possible anyway. And they're just going to try to pretend like, well, your company told us you had a full clock when you got there. Well, maybe they did. I don't fucking know what they told you. I shouldn't be talking to the broker in the first place. What is this? I'm the driver. Like, what? Why am I talking to the broker? Why is the broker? They know they're fucking with me. It's a spiritual attack, These are some of the worst people you'll ever encounter if you've ever dealt with a freight broker. It's just horrible human beings across the board. Horrible. I knew nothing about trucking, and I worked at a computer store that also the the guy that owned it and operated it. Him and his brother got into this was in Bentonville, Arkansas. They got into developing properties to rent out to Walmart vendors. So we rented space in our building to these to a brokerage, dispatchers, or what we thought were dispatchers. They weren't dispatchers; they were freight brokers, and maybe they offered dispatching services. I have no idea, but they were freight brokers. And I spent enough time. There's three guys. I spent enough time with them to realize, oh, these are fucking scumbags. All three of them are complete scumbags, and it never made sense to me. And meanwhile, for me to come to that conclusion just through observing their behavior, that's back then in my 20s. That they really had to be pieces of garbage, and they never did anything to me. I could just tell they were pieces of garbage. And I probably overheard them the way they talked about whoever they did business with is probably what it was. Or maybe they would make jokes amongst themselves, who knows. But I don't, it's been too long ago, I don't remember. And then after I went into trucking, I said, oh, okay, it all makes sense now. I understand. Because the people who work in that, the people who are freight brokers are scum. That's just what they are. That's who ends up being good at that job is scumbags. Meanwhile, surprise, surprise, the worst encounters I've had with a trucking company that I allowed to employ me was ART Transportation, who just happened to have their own in-house brokerage of like 10 to 15 brokers. Surprise, surprise. The entire company was scumbags, as far as I can tell, as far as the office staff. Funny how that works. Anyway, bear with me. It's time for the first bathroom break of the journey. If there's anywhere to pull over, anyway. And there sort of is. Sort of, kind of. Kind of, sort of. My apologies for any sounds you may hear, but it is. Tis what it is. Woo-hoo. Oh, wait, I guess I'll mute it. Yeah, I can mute. All right, we're back. Mission accomplished. Man, I must have got up ahead a huge group of vehicles. It just looks like rush hour out here now. Goodness. On the road again. Anyway, I guess that's about it on the spiritual discoursing, if that's what we're calling it. And then, well, I want to wrap up, or not even wrap up, but I probably do need to mention. So, when people try to problem solve society, you can't problem solve societal ills, because the cause is that people are fed to the beast system out of the gate, and then knowingly or unknowingly continue to feed themselves to the beast system, and then knowingly or unknowingly feed their children to the beast system. So any social problem or political problem or just any problem whatsoever at a group societal level, it comes back to stop feeding oneself and one's children to the beast. That's the solution. But the psyche and the psychology says anything achievable is only achievable through an assertive, aggressive, dominant means, the so-called yang form of the yin and the yang. So to stop doing a thing, that's yin or passive or accepting or receiving. It's to just, hey, stop doing the thing that's causing the problems. It's not to do a different thing when we all know that to do a different thing will eventually lead to the exact same problems anyway, even if it seemingly solves them temporarily. That's just how that works. And that is, another supposed mathematical genius, Ted Kaczynski. If we look at the writings attributed to him, I call it Kaczynskiism. As far as I'm concerned, he more or less proves that that's what will always happen. No matter what choices, the individuals make within these systems, and whatever upheavals or uprisings or reformations or corrections occur, it's all going to, in the end, it's only ever going to perpetuate and strengthen the system itself. That's what this is. It's a beast system. If the being is feeding themselves to the beast, it doesn't matter what they do. The beast is still fed, right? And this idea that the beast must play perfectly and it must operate perfectly or people will figure it out and, quote, wake up and then fix everything, that's not possible. That's a lie. That's wrong. It's provably wrong with logic and reason. In order for that to be true, the beast must play perfectly, and if one little fucking domino or if one little card in the house of cards is removed, then the whole thing comes crashing down. It doesn't work that way. It's actually maintained within a state of collapse, no matter what happens. So it's the feeding oneself and feeding one's children to the beast that keeps this thing running. That's the fuel. That's what's going on, whether literally, metaphorically, or both. Remember, it's within the context of delusion and illusion. A dream, always needing to reconcile and solve for waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, deja vu all over again. Those elements are always present within all phenomena or contexts. There's never waking dreams, surrealistic unreality. Always tend to seem psychedelic. This place certainly its ways of reminding the people who are actually paying attention and able to observe the environment in certain ways. The realm manages to remind me when I do forget temporarily, when I forget to solve for waking dreams, surrealistic unreality. It has its ways of reminding me, or at least here's your clue. Just like when I read a book on lucid dreaming when I was a teenager and somewhat mastered it to some extent, the book said to look for certain things in the dream to then be able to know that the being is dreaming, right? Such as if you look at the clock, even if you can tell what time it says, if you look back at it later, if you can tell what time it says, it's going to say a completely different, like it won't even be close to what it said before. Or maybe you look at the clock and it's like, wow, there's no hands, or the hands are just spinning around, whatever, as it may be. Or look at a piece of paper, or try to read something, look away, then look back at it, and it's not going to stay the same in the dream. Things like that. To attempt to observe the environment in ways to then, and so once the being knows how to do that, it's then all about not being too aware of the physical body, because then typically the being will wake up. So it's to teach oneself how to remain in the dream state and the sleep state while one part of the being understands that they're dreaming, but without becoming too aware of other things that will bring them out of the dream. And I definitely should have left earlier now that I see the route we're taking. Or is this I-40 already? Oh, never mind. I hope we're not going all through the middle of fucking nowhere. Maybe we are. Might be doing a little bit of stoplight driving. Now it says 8:30. Why does it say 8:30? Did I miss a fucking turn somewhere? I probably did. Hang on, let me figure this out. Let's get back up to speed and see when does it think we're going to get there. Now we're in a fucking, not a traffic jam, but now we're in rush hour, and it's like, again, having to just sit around for an hour and a half, it's asinine. It really is. Because I wouldn't be driving in this. And in case anybody's unclear, your red state MAGA types are the absolute worst drivers possible. I mean, it's just just god awful. It's really bad. This is one of those areas, certainly. Yeah, I guess we're still on the proper route. Okay, good. Where's my coffee? Oh, there it is. And I even forget. Like I remember, yes, something happened yesterday to remind me of the waking dream aspects. I don't even remember what it was. It's funny how that works. This is just god awful, miserable being around these drivers. They're just the worst, the absolute worst. Well, I guess it's time for some blueberries. And I'm not a huge organic person as far as buying organic produce or whatever, but at least what they sell at Walmart, the organic blueberries are way fucking better than the non-organic. It ain't even, I'm talking about the taste. It ain't even close. So I think this is the last of the non-organic. And the ones I had yesterday, it didn't taste like anything. It just almost had no taste. It's fucking weird. Whereas the organic will usually have a pretty sharp taste to them. And these are also kind of suspiciously large. But yeah, bear with me. I hate to eat on stream, but anyway, I guess I'm probably done. We did an hour and a half. That's good enough. Yeah, I'm out of here. Bye.